They're blockading the Strait of Hormuz. Indiana Senator Jim Banks says America has all the leverage during the negotiations.
Drop the nuclear program, stop funneling money to terrorist proxy groups, and open the straits, or we're going to bomb you. And President Trump has kept his word every step of the way. The Iranians know that, and that's why they're begging to come back to the table.
California Congressman Eric Swalwell announced Monday he plans to resign from Congress. He suspended his campaign for California governor on Sunday. Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna says she received forensic reports about what she calls the infamous video of Swalwell in a hotel room.
It was not AI generated, but I'm also being told that more stuff is going to be dropping in the next 24 hours. And then also potentially the individual that recorded that video in that hotel room was a female and she was underage.
Turning Point USA journalist Savannah Hernandez was attacked during an anti-ICE protest in Minneapolis on Saturday. Demonstrators at the Whipple Federal Building yelling in her face, blowing horns, and violently shoving her to the ground. White House Border Czar Tom Homan says this attack is part of the left wing's hatred of the Trump administration.
She's a patriot. She went out there, a female in that crowd, to report to the American people the truth. But the left doesn't want to hear the truth. They want to vilify Turning Point USA because they have conservative beliefs. I mean, they attack journalists. Well, they also attack sworn law enforcement officers. We're living in a country now where an ICE officer gets attacked daily.
A recent survey found 64% of parents financially support their Gen Z children aged 18 to 28, with 56% reporting financial strain. Young Voices commentator Maggie Anders questions whether this support encourages independence or dependence, citing the stay-at-home boyfriend trend, where more women work than men.
I think it's important for us to qualify what kind of financial support this is. If you have an 18-year-old freshman in college who's getting straight A's and you want to throw them a little bit of money, that makes a lot of sense. It makes sense to, host your post-grad at your home so that they can save on rent as they're starting in the corporate world so that they can buy a house later on. But if we're talking about, to speak in archetypes, a triple-degreed Starbucks barista with 6 figures of student loan debt who has a crisis every 3 months that you have to bail them out of, I think that's deeply concerning. And so parents really need to ask themselves, are they cultivating financial independence or dependence in their children?
And finally, efficient messaging in weather communications is essential in getting important information to the public.
Part of the mission of the National Weather Service is to protect life and property. They periodically ask their partners for feedback to help them with their messages to the public. One recent example is a change to the National Hurricane Center's cone to better communicate hazards of tropical storms and hurricanes. The cone shows the probable path of a tropical system center over 5 days. But other things are new this year, like showing inland tropical storm and hurricane watches and warnings. Central Texas meteorologist Troy Kimmel says the National Weather Service does a good job with this messaging.
I think the Weather Service does a pretty good job with their what we call watch warnings advisory program. I think they do a pretty good job with that. Could they be better? Yes. Are there problems that I have with some of it? Yeah. I think there are too many warnings in this country.
He says another issue is misleading weather messaging on social media.
You don't post a 360-hour model run and tell people to run for the hills, and we're seeing that nowadays, and that's terribly unfortunate. Make sure that on your cell phones you have those WIA alerts set so that when you get a substantial flash flood warning or a tornado warning that comes out, you're going to end up getting that information.
Kimball also said to have a weather radio and is in favor of a National Weather Service app for our phones, where someone could input their county and location in the settings. I'm Robert Thorne.
For American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh.
At Wesley Biblical Seminary, we are working today to equip tomorrow's pastors and Christian leaders through biblical and theological education and practical ministry that's accredited, affordable, online, and highly personal. So whatever your next step is in being equipped for ministry, we're here for you. And if you believe these are the kinds of pastors we need leading our churches in the future, we invite you to learn more about Wesley Biblical Seminary by visiting us at wbs.edu today.
Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview.
The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, April 14th, and wow, a really bang-up news cycle yesterday in so many different ways, primarily that 2 members of Congress are exiting this week as Congress goes back into session and the House starts its legislative business today. Representative Eric Swalwell, a California Democrat, suspended his gubernatorial campaign and plans to resign after the House Ethics Committee launched a probe into allegations involving multiple women, including former staffers and interns. Of course, he denies the claims and cited past mistakes, quote unquote, in judgment. It's always, the past mistakes, but nothing that should ever rise to the level of actual criminality or accountability or, resignation. But he did resign, did suspend his campaign, and that wasn't really a surprise. The only big surprise was that it took 13 years for journalists who apparently knew what were going on the entire time to actually come forward and be like, yeah, we knew, but, apparently it didn't matter until it mattered to the Democrats. And then Representative Tony Gonzalez, a Texas Republican, announced retirement plans. Yeah, retirement, which means resigning, following his admission of an affair with a staffer who later died by suicide amid party scrutiny, which was just a terrible situation. The rare bipartisan push, with figures like Nancy Mace demanding expulsions and Rep. Pramila Jayapal vowing support, averts potential votes and highlights rising accountability demands in Congress, that coming from X. And maybe because of these resignations, which we'll get more into that in a later segment, maybe that will allow Congress to actually do the business of, legislating and actually supporting President Trump in the America First agenda. And so the other, of course, big news that is still going on is the entire conflict with Iran and how negotiations failed, with Vice President J.D. Vance helming that and suggesting that Iran just would not come to the table, thought that they had more leverage than they actually did, which is, to me, a little bit laughable that Iran thought that it had any leverage at all. But where are we headed in terms of the peace plans? There hasn't been a ton in the news about the United States 15-point peace plan versus Iran's something like 10-point peace plan, and apparently they're so far apart that negotiations really aren't still ongoing. But let's welcome in Scott Uehlinger, who's a former intelligence agent. And Scott, where are we at overall?
Good morning, Jenna. Obviously, President Trump's plan to enact a blockade has really thrown the Iranians off balance. I don't know why they were so surprised by this. I mean, the blockade of an enemy is the standard procedure. It's been used for hundreds of years and very effectively, such that even after the first day of doing this, Iran immediately said, we haven't actually walked away from the negotiations. We're still willing to talk. But their willingness to talk includes apparently something like, 5 years moratorium on nuclear weapons development. Well, that's entirely ridiculous. And so the blockade continues. It's actually costing, in terms of oil exports, it's costing Iran $140 million a day. And it's actually costing the country overall more than $435 million a day. So when this happens, the economy, which already is in really bad shape, is going into an absolute tailspin. And of course, once that happens, then the likelihood of someone rising up, or the people rising up and stepping in and getting rid of the mullahs, gets greater by the day. So that's what's causing the panic in the with the mullahs in Iran.
Well, and so with it costing that much for Iran per day, I mean, put that in perspective. Is that kind of a drop in the bucket, or is that significant to their economy?
No, it's significant. It's significant. Already, we're talking about in February, they had the food inflation was 105%. That's in 1 month. So that means the costs more than doubled for everything in a month. Rice, I think in the past year maybe, rice is up by a factor of 7. So that's 700% increase in the price of rice. So it's hurting the people. And now the blockade will technically would allow in humanitarian aid into Iranian ports. That's where, and I'm sure the Trump administration is all over that. That's where they've got to be really careful, because what happened with Iraq was that when we started shipping in aid to the people of Iraq, Saddam Hussein confiscated it and used it only for his army. And then the people suffered, and he actually consolidated power. So I'm sure that we're not going to make the same mistake again. And if any humanitarian aid goes in there, it will go to the Iranian people, or it just won't go in at all.
And so with this blockade, how is that potentially going to affect ultimately the gas prices in the United States? Because that's really been the big political question for the Trump administration, with a lot of people seeing, I mean, even here in Florida, I've definitely seen an increase in gas prices, and especially heading into the midterms. It doesn't seem like Trump is really that concerned yet, but we're only in April. We have all the way till November. We're not even through the primaries yet. I mean, this is not his first rodeo. He's probably thinking, okay, we have a lot of time. But that is something that at least the mainstream media news has been really all over. I mean, CNN was having some kind of like gas price ticker, of course, going on. I mean, it reminded me of like their COVID death ticker. It's like, anything that they think is negative to the Trump administration, they just put up. But, where is all of that in terms of the blockade and how it'll affect it?
Right. Prices of gas are up, but what of course, CNN conveniently ignores is that during the entire Biden administration, the price of oil was about the price it is right now. Mm-hmm. And for older people like myself who remember even back to the days of Obama, the price of gas right now, it's about $4.20 maybe in Pennsylvania. That's what it was when Obama was president. If people remember way back, because I remember. Of course, $4 then was even more money because of the inflationary effect on the dollar. But I think that the problem is that, of course, we are increasing our oil exports big time. So I think in the short term, we have a little bit of pain. But in the long term, this is all a very good move, because what it's doing is it's solidifying the U.S.'s lead in natural gas and oil export, because a lot of these tankers in frustration are now headed to the United States, to the Gulf of America, because now we have the Venezuelan oil we're also processing into gasoline and other products. So this is all very good for the rebirth of American industrialization. We have a little short-term pain, but I think that that'll go away. Europe, of course, is highly dependent on the Persian Gulf, and now they're turning to the United States because they have no choice. So I think Trump is willing, and wisely willing, to wait a little while and let it get because it's much more uncomfortable for every other country on earth than it is for us. We're spoiled. So like a little bit of a high price at the pumps is nothing compared to what every other country in the world is paying for this. And Trump is willing to tolerate that for a little while, because in the end, it will solidify our position as the premier, far and away, energy exporter of the world.
That I think is a rational position as well, that on the grand scheme of things, and especially compared to what Israel is enduring right now with, this ongoing conflict and then what they've had to endure from Hezbollah and, over the last, several years since that October attack. I mean, that is nothing what the United States has been through is nothing compared to that. And so it should be that, if we have a little bit of higher gas prices, maybe we can put that all into perspective. But it seems like the political, partisan, especially media, but some of the propaganda, quite frankly, is always intent on, going after Trump, of course, but using all of that to leverage their view specifically on the conflict. And so, overall, as this is continuing, I mean, Trump hasn't just come out and declared victory and saying, okay, we're done. So this is continuing to proceed. And do we have kind of an expectation of maybe how long this conflict now is going to continue? Because it doesn't really seem like there's a foreseeable end.
Well, I mean, I think that we really look at things I think, let's say a month to 6 weeks. Blockades tend to take a little bit of time, but I think you're going to really start seeing some massive rumblings after about a month. That's the nature of blockades. This was what was proposed for Japan before we had the A-bomb, because without the A-bomb, we would have been looking at boots on the ground, and basically a blockade was a lot safer way of doing things for the United States, and it's the same way now. This is a lot safer way of doing things instead of boots on the ground, because we have a much less chance of the U.S. Navy taking damage. That danger does still exist. It's just at a lower level, and it's acceptable for the armed forces. That's what combat involves, is risk or potential combat. So the other thing, by the way, I wanted to mention is you talked about important things yesterday. This is another very important piece, is that the United States concluded an agreement with Indonesia. And Indonesia is important because the Straits of Malacca are far more important than that's where Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. That strait is far more important for world energy, and also importantly, China, than the Straits of Hormuz. Because what Trump is doing, he is embracing the classic sea power philosophy of Mahan, if anyone recalls that name, an admiral who wrote about this a century ago. And basically, sea powers always are stronger than land powers if they know how to use their power properly. And if Trump is helping to sew up the Straits of Malacca, that is going to make China more vulnerable than it's ever been. When you combine Venezuela with what's going on in Hormuz, with what is developing in Malacca, Trump is going to be going to a meeting with China, and he holds all of the cards.
And so that really pushes back on this narrative that, Iran thought it had leverage, and, people are questioning now, if Iran had no leverage, then why are we preparing for a blockade that could shake the entire global economy? But as you're suggesting, I think wisely pointing out, Scott Uehlinger, this is a bigger picture than just the Strait of Hormuz, which is what the American media has been so focused on, but they're not really taking everything into account.
Right. I mean, like I said, he is performing an absolute masterclass in foreign policy, the likes of which no one alive has ever seen. This is great power maneuvering, and what it's going to do is it's going to increase U.S. security, and it's going to make an impossibility any kind of a China-U.S. war in the future. It's not going to happen, because this kind of thing is peace through strength, and it's making the world safer than ever.
Wow. And, it really does go to show that there are completely different perspectives on the war in Iran, and the conflict, and saying, okay, we should continue to trust President Trump's foreign policy versus, what I think a lot of Americans, even conservatives, are feeling a little bit anxious and kind of wondering, okay, when is this conflict going to end? And do we have the strategic objectives still, and, maybe don't understand this, totally in context. But, like me, I mean, I'm not a foreign policy expert. That's why I love people like you, Scott Uehlinger, coming on the program and sharing your expertise, because I learn a lot and it puts it in better perspective. And so, maybe we can give this a little more time and we can see where it continues. But we're already out of time for this segment. So again, Scott Uehlinger, really appreciate it. You can follow him on X, and we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.
Hey everybody, it's Chad with the band Unspoken. I've seen firsthand how powerful it is when the church comes together, and that's exactly what Redeem Health Share is all about. With rising medical costs, Redeem offers a more affordable way to care for your family. Their flexible programs are designed to fit your budget without sacrificing your values. Each month, members contribute a share amount to help pay each other's medical bills, and you choose the providers and the treatments that are right for your family. It's not just about the money, it's about community. Redeem Health Share is rooted in biblical principles. So whether it's a routine visit or sudden emergency, there's a caring Christian community walking with you every step of the way. This time of the year is a great reminder to make choices that reflect our faith. So if you're looking for another way forward, one that reflects your faith, this is it. Call 844-REDEEM-0 today. Join the movement, share joyfully, and live redeemed.
Okay, here's an assignment for you, if you will. I want you to take some time and think about a getaway that gives you a chance to get together with other people of faith, deepen your walk with God, and make new friends, all while enjoying the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter in Kentucky. I'm talking about joining AFA at the Ark, October 29th and 30th. This is a great opportunity to break away from the grind of everyday life and draw closer to God through special presentations from Patricia Engler and Brian Osborne of Answers in Genesis. It also includes entrance to the Creation Museum on Thursday and the Ark Encounter on Friday. Friday's dinner includes a panel discussion with Tony Vitagliano, Walker Wildman, and Wesley Wildman, Vice Presidents of American Family Association. This is an event that can fill up quickly, so hurry to afa.net/events to register for AFA at the Ark 2026. afa.net/events, and we'll see you at the Ark.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Starnes. Stand by for news and commentary next. The New Year's Eve ball drop in Times Square, one of the most popular events in the nation. Upwards of 2 million people pile into the crossroads of the world to ring in the new year. Beloved tradition. So organizers of the America 250 celebration in New York City thought it would be fun to drop the ball again on July 3rd to ring in the 4th of July and our great nation's big birthday celebration. But Mayor Auron MacIntyre, the communist, well, he's thrown a bucket of cold water on the celebration. That's because the public will not be allowed to attend. The change came after Comrade MacIntyre issued an emergency order banning certain gatherings. But what's weird is how specific the order is, applying only to events between June 11th and July 19th, and any event that is not a demonstration. In other words, if you hate America, it's okay to protest, but celebrations in honor of America are not allowed. Sounds to me like Comrade MacIntyre has already dropped the ball. I'm Todd Starnes.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, the other piece of news yesterday that was just, some days I think this is really what we need to cover, and this is really what everybody is talking about, and this is really what is going on. And it usually boils down to something that Trump posted online, right? I mean, in the last 10 years of the whole Trump era, and that used to be my life, right? Like when I worked for him, it would be like we would wake up and actually a friend of mine and I, who, she used to work for Trump as well and in comms and everything. And we used to get up every morning and like text you, what are we going to have to deal with today, right? And of what he posted on social media. And after the first term, and after we were both no longer working for him, then when things like this would come out online, we would text each other, "Hallelujah, not my problem," which is just so much better to be on this side of just being able to comment on it than actually have to speak on behalf of Trump on, some of these things, because yesterday this was just so unnecessary. So unnecessary, which really describes a lot of what Trump does. And like, there are so many great things that he does. And I was actually talking to a friend yesterday at the dog park. We're sitting there with our dogs, and we were talking about this. And she was saying, in his first term, like, he used to actually be really funny. And some of the stuff, even if it was, wow, he really posted that, it was like he was posting things that everybody was like, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And he resonated that way, and I think became kind of this larger than life figure because he was willing to say the blunt truth that nobody else in politics, at least in the current era, had been willing to. But now it's like in this, especially in the second term, it's either just mean or it's just so totally unnecessary. And so yesterday, what he posted, which was actually the night before, so Sunday night, he posted this meme, which was not an original of his. Apparently, it had been posted by, some of these other MAGA figures previously, but somehow, Trump sees it. He posted on his Truth Social where he's wearing garb that is clearly invoking Jesus. So it's the white robe with the red garment over it, the robe of at the foot of the cross. American flag in the background, warriors, eagles, the whole, it's like ChatGPT, like, make this even bolder, even more epic, right? Like, it's one of those types. And then there are people around praying, and he is touching this man's forehead who is lying on, in the foreground and looks sick. And it's like he's touching him, healing the sick, right? So, of course, rational Christians are like, really, dude? Like, come on. And it went from a criticism of like, man, he shouldn't have posted this, to this is blasphemous, which I agree with that. There is no way. I mean, we are supposed to be like Jesus, but we are not Jesus. And it was very clearly invoking that. And then, so this goes on, and everybody's talking about it yesterday. Meanwhile, Eric Swalwell is, dealing with all of his stuff. But everybody's talking about it. So Trump actually goes and deletes it, which was shocking. He never deletes anything. But apparently, and sources tell me that there were a few influential Christians that were like really, really advocating for him to take this down, which he did, thankfully. And I'm glad he listened to a few of those Christians. But then he gave the reason and the rationale. And it's coming from the New York Post. And it's like, really just keep on digging. Trump revealed why he deleted AI post of himself as Jesus-like figure. He explained Monday that he deleted the AI-generated image that appeared to depict him as Jesus Christ because of the confusion the social media post caused. And he said, people were confused. I didn't want to have anybody confused. And he told reporters he thought the image of himself placing the hand on the forehead of a man in a hospital bed with heavenly light radiating from his other hand, quote, was me as a doctor, and it had to do with the Red Cross. Like, nobody is buying that. And that is the worst of all situations. Instead, maybe just ignore it and say, you know what, I thought it was funny, but other people took offense to it, so I took it down. Like, don't even explain. Don't even try to explain. And then there are some people like Allie Beth Stuckey, who I really respect. I really like her. She's a friend of mine. I mean, we're not super close, but we know each other. Well, we've been at speaking events together, and she actually posted that she believed Trump's explanation. She got totally reamed in the comments because, this is one of those situations. I don't think Trump is that stupid, and I don't think that he is that illiterate of the historical context of all of this, and that he didn't know exactly what he was doing. And to make that kind of excuse, there is just no reason why we as Christians and as truth tellers first, like, defend Trump on all of his policy. I mean, I voted for the guy, 3 times. I mean, defend him on all that. But this is something that is just totally indefensible, but it's also just totally obnoxious, and it's totally a distraction from everything else going on. So let's welcome in Auron MacIntyre, who's a host at The Blaze. And Auron, I actually loved your post about this, which was in response, it was just the meme of Ben Affleck, who's just standing outside with that just defeated expression on his face, smoking a cigarette. That was the perfect response.
Yeah, I think we were all Ben Affleck smoking a cigarette that day. But yeah, it's one of those scenarios where it's just a huge unforced error. And, obviously Trump is a guy who has always posted whatever he wants, whenever he wants. And a lot of people, when it was first posted, were saying, oh, well, it's fake, or, oh, no, I'm sure an intern probably posted it without him knowing it. And then, of course, Trump comes out and says, no, of course I posted. It's me. And this is the good and bad of Trump. He's unfiltered. He says exactly what he thinks. And it's great when his, guns are aimed at targets that we all agree deserve it, right? And this is why I warn people, don't become some shrieking blue-haired feminist over Trump's posts out of nowhere. We know what this is. At the same time, when you're posting things that are going to offend a large amount of your base, and not just libs that are out of control, then you're doing some political malpractice. And of course, this all comes in the context of Trump feuding with the Pope, who I think, by the way, is wrong. I'm an evangelical Christian. The Pope is just a guy in a funny hat to me. But to many Christians across the world, he's pretty important, and a lot of those Christians were voting for you. So you want to be thoughtful in the way that you push back, if you push back at all. So just kind of a mess all around for the president for the last few days when it comes with his relationship with multiple parts of the Christian body.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And this is kind of the balance, right? Is that we can and should, as Christians first and foremost, but also as conservatives, we should be able to call this out and say, no, this is blasphemous, and no, this is a distraction, and no, this is just juvenile, this is beneath the dignity, all of that stuff, while not going overboard and being and therefore I'm not supporting any of the good policy, that Trump is doing. And if I was for the Iran conflict, well, now because Trump posted a meme on Truth Social, I'm, rejecting my support of him. I mean, that kind of vacillation between this kind of love-hate dogma, it's just exhausting, and it's also, I think, juvenile of a response. And I actually thought what Riley Gaines posted in response to Trump, kind of saying he's not a fan of her because she criticized him for this post, rightly so. And then she just said, I love the president and I want, him to succeed and all this stuff, but I'm going to speak the truth, and I'm not looking, for his favor. And it was just a very nonchalant, calculated response. That's exactly what Christian conservatives need to do. While he's kind of this, back and forth, up and down, who knows, what side of the bed he's getting up out of today. We just need to be consistent Christian conservatives.
No, I totally agree. As you said, I am somebody who has very much opposed the war in Iran, but I still understand what Donald Trump is doing domestically. I still understand that Jan 6 defendants would be in jail if he hadn't pardoned them. I understand the borders would be open if he wasn't the president. I understand we wouldn't be getting any deportations. We wouldn't be challenging birthright citizenship, any of this stuff without Donald Trump. So, I can have a significant disagreement with the man and still understand that he is the best option available. And, ultimately, Donald Trump has been, especially on the issue of immigration, the best Republican president of my lifetime. But that doesn't mean he's perfect, and that doesn't mean I'm, going to be quiet when I think he's making a mistake. I can say Napoleon was a great general, but marching into Russia in the winter is still a foolish decision. Donald Trump shouldn't have gone to war in Iran, and he shouldn't have posted a picture of himself as Jesus Christ. These are both bad decisions in my opinion, but I can say that without then turning around and saying, and now I'm done with the Republican Party, I've given up on MAGA, I'm no longer part of the conservative movement, I'm voting for Kamala Harris or something. These are all ridiculous reactions.
Yes, 100%, because hopefully you and I as Christians and as conservatives aren't like the left, governed primarily by emotion. We should be governed by rationality and ultimately by principles. And, and of course, some of those then the opinions can differ in terms of policy. That's all debatable, and we can still both call ourselves conservative Christians and respect each other as such, even if we have, different opinions on different policy, and those can be debatable, but we can still come at it from the same principles that are ultimately grounded in biblical truth. And we can also debate without it becoming just devolving into emotion, which is what you see a lot of times online. And frankly, what I think a lot of the reaction yesterday, there were a lot of Christians that rightly called him out, rightly said, there should be better Christians around him. But, he's selecting the people around him. For so long, people have said and blamed the people around Trump, but he's the one who picks those around him. And so, he's the one who picked Paula White to be his faith, person at the White House. And there were a lot of people that were saying, her influence is not great, which I agree, but he's the one that picked her. And he's had her as an influential figure in his life for decades. And so at some point, it does become his responsibility, not just of those around him. And I do wish that he had better Christians around him. But at the same time, he does have the influence of sincere Christians. I've been in the room when pastors, when people I respect are literally sharing the gospel with him, literally talking about, principles and conservative values. So at the end of the day, my opinion is the accountability and the buck stops with him. But we can also react in a way that is principled. But speaking of a lack of principles completely, Auron, I also want to get your take on the two resignations from Congress. Eric Swalwell, the Democrat, and Tony Gonzalez, the Republican. Both of them were up for potential expulsion. And so both are choosing, as of yesterday, to resign from Congress. Frankly, I think that both resignations are warranted, and I don't think it should matter whether it's a D or an R after your name. If you have actually done what both of these men are credibly accused of, then yeah, they should have resigned from Congress.
I guess it helps in this scenario that it's 1-1, and so the political calculus balances out at some level. But ultimately, it's going to depend on where that person is. If they have actually committed the crime, there's often scenarios where people have simply been shamed out of office through threats or these kind of things. But obviously, if that ball is going to drop eventually anyway, then it's both the right thing to do and allows you to get out of the way in case the party wants to attempt to run someone else in that place or appoint someone. And so ultimately, that's going to be the right decision. People will encourage different actors to stay in office in order to secure their seats, even if the person is somewhat controversial. But again, I think it really depends on a case-by-case business. What are they accused of? What's the level of evidence? Ultimately, are they culpable for the act? I don't think it's wise to ever, even if you think it's going to be short-term politically advantageous, to try to shove someone into that slot and keep them there when they otherwise are going to end up damaging the party and reputation, along with just being the wrong thing to do. And you have to weigh that. You can't be so short-sighted not to realize what that's going to cost you, especially, to be clear, in a moment where, political accountability is very low, and people feel that in a very real way. They're very angry with the fact that our ruling class is never held accountable. They never pay a cost. Making sure that you sacrifice your long-term prospects with the voting public by reinforcing that image, that's a bad play.
Yeah. And I agree with you that, there is always the political calculus, and that maybe, it appeared to me pretty obvious that the reason that Gonzalez kind of slipped in his resignation was kind of, trying to sort of play under Eric Swalwell's resignation, because then it is just a 1-for-1 in terms of the party, but also just in terms of the optics. Then he didn't get all of the heat of the PR and the media. It was more on Swalwell. But overall, I'm still of the opinion that independently, even if you review the facts of these, just individually for themselves, and they should be, reviewed independently, not the political calculus, taken as much into consideration. Each of these men deserve to resign from Congress on their own merit. And I think Corey Mills, with everything that he is credibly accused of and the facts where they have led, at least insofar as they have been reported, he is one that is potentially up for expulsion as well. And I think that should have happened a while ago. And, it just seems like all of this corruption only comes out, though, when it's politically advantageous and with that calculus. Like, there was a reporter who said, I was covering Eric Swalwell back in, it would have been about 12, 13 years ago. Everybody knew that he was up to, this type of stuff. And everybody rightly lambasted him and said, okay, so you're just now telling us, like, why not as a reporter do your job of the press and actually report on that at the time? I mean, that says, I think, more about the media covering for their preferred party actors than actually doing their job of the media. And this is why everyone across the board has lost so much trust in the mainstream media. And this is why Trump rightly calls them fake news.
Yeah, I mean, this is just, I think, extremely obvious to everyone at this point. My friend Kevin Dolan said, Eric Swalwell is an otherwise completely unimpressive human being. The only reason to elevate him is that he can be controlled because he's obviously a cretin, right? Like that, and this is why the Epstein stuff continues to hold on to the public imagination, no matter how much of it happens to be true, because even if every detail of the Epstein files or the rumors around them aren't correct, people feel that it's directionally correct because they can see the level of corruption, the level of sexual impropriety, especially inside the game. And they suspect that, I think very rightly, that many people are only involved in politics because they can be controlled through this stuff. I mean, we all remember Madison Cawthorn, right? Like, we all remember his stories about, lewd parties he was invited to or pressured to attend before he left, and the way everyone turned on him once he made that announcement and explained it to people. I mean, this stuff is clearly going on in Washington, D.C. It is clearly an engine of power, and it's very clear that many people in the system would like to have corrupt people who are easily managed through extortion, through bribery, through that blackmail, rather than people who have principles, have the ability to think for themselves, are independent, and have the ability to stand up for the people they're supposed to represent. So people get, I think, rightly the impression that our political class is largely people who have been elevated because they can be manipulated, because they're degenerate, because they are unwilling to stand for anything. That's what makes them politically useful. And again, that's why the Epstein stuff never goes away, because even if different parts aren't necessarily true, people feel like, I think, again, correctly, that it echoes a truth that we see in the system day in and day out.
Yeah, absolutely. And Madison Cawthorn, to your point, I saw a post that he made on X yesterday that said, something to the effect, and by the way, he's not the only one, obviously referencing his allegations and, the things that he basically got ousted from the party for coming forward with. And so has to be feeling perhaps a little bit of, of some vindication based on, all of the things that are coming out. But, that raises the larger question, though, I think, Auron, where are we going from here? Not just in terms of, obviously Swalwell and Gonzalez's seats will be filled and, eventually and all of that stuff and business as usual in Congress. But do you think that this is maybe a tipping point potentially of actually getting some accountability? I mean, people are talking about too how TMZ launched a DC bureau, and a lot of Congress members are very concerned about that because apparently the main reason that they're in DC is to root out this corruption and to call out the members of Congress for what they're doing in their personal lives in this respect.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought I'd say this, but, very nice of TMZ to be doing a true civic service, service
Right.
to its nation. Never thought I'd be rooting for these guys. But, yeah, I mean, totally,
What a
right?
day.
If Hollywood is corrupt, if these people are already sleaze bags and TMZ is great at exposing them, why not expose the corrupt Washington machine for the American people? We all, the joke has been said many times, but, politics is Hollywood for ugly people, right? That's why a lot of people get involved in it. That's why they seem so unprincipled, because they just want to be famous. They just want attention. They just want people to fawn over them. They just want access to the kind of things that fame and money bring. But, they couldn't sing, they couldn't dance, and they're not pretty enough, so they got into politics. And so there's obviously an area there that is just ripe for an organization like TMZ to expose what's going on. And, again, I never thought I'd see it, but God bless them, Godspeed.
Right, and same, and it makes sense. I mean, with DC, it's been known as ugly Hollywood for all the reasons that you're describing, and it's actually surprising that some of these kind of what they call the Hollywood gossip rags, right, that they haven't seen kind of this fertile ground of DC to go and do the same things that they've been doing in Hollywood for decades. They could be doing the same thing in Washington, D.C., but to your point also, it is so true, and I saw it when I was in D.C., and one of the things I absolutely hated about ugly Hollywood was how much people there are just so focused on wanting access, fame, money, power. I mean, that's all that it is. DC should be, and I went in kind of this bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, sort of like, Constitution civics enthusiast going, this is going to be amazing, serve my country. And like, I had this impression of DC as this, the seat of everything that our Constitution and our founders, love about this country. And then I saw all of the corruption and the degeneracy and the people who aren't there for statesmanship motivations and actually to serve their country, but to serve themselves. And that's the thing that I think we need to, at the core, we need to root out and vote out the people who are only there for themselves instead of there to actually serve. I mean, there are a couple of people, and thankfully a lot of them I have on this program, like our good friend Marlon Stutzman, others in Congress. I think Brandon Gill is doing a great job. There are a few that are there for the right reasons, and I hope and I pray that they don't get there and then become sort of taken over by the swamp and see, all of the media and the glitz and glamour. I mean, that was never something for me as a Christian that mattered. It was never something that was attractive to me. But at the same time, it is a temptation for people who go there, even if that's not their base motivation initially. That becomes their motivation, and it also becomes something where they don't want to lose their power, lose their influence, lose their fame, and so they start compromising just to stay in their job. And that's when we, as the constituency, look at them and say, we elected you to do a job and you're not doing it. Why not? It's because of all these other influences. But we've got to take a break here, and Auron MacIntyre, I so appreciate your commentary and your view on all of this. And I hope and I pray that the individuals who end up in Eric Swalwell's and Tony Gonzalez's seats will be statesmen and will be people who have undeniably better moral character than the two that resigned. And that's really all that we can pray for. I mean, I wish that we would just completely drain Congress and start new. I mean, we have a couple of good apples, but most of them, I think, I would love to just start over. But, at least we got rid of two. That's a start. We'll be right back with more.
Do you want your life to really matter? Here's Pastor Jeff Shreve.
You want to make the rest of your life the best of your life? It's not going to happen unless you put God's action plan into practice in your life. And you will have the experience one day of standing before the Lord and hearing Him say to you, well done.
Discover how you can hear God say, "Well done." Join Pastor Jeff Shreve on From His Heart each weeknight at 6 Central here on American Family Radio.
For many Christians, the end times can be a confusing and hard to understand topic. When the world finally comes to an end, how will the events unfold? This week on Pathway to Victory, Dr. Robert Jeffress provides an overview of the end times and explains what will happen during the rapture. Join us this week for Pathway to Victory with Dr. Robert Jeffress.
Weekday mornings at 6 Central on American Family Radio.
And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled 8-1 in favor of Kaylee Childs, a Christian counselor who challenged the Colorado law that sought to punish her for helping confused children embrace their God-given sex and identities instead of pushing trans insanity. The law at issue prohibited counselors from aiding children with unwanted same-sex attraction or dysphoria, from helping them reject the distortions and confusion, but get this, it allowed counselors to encourage children to embrace same-sex attraction or transgenderism. Go figure. Colorado set itself to legally require millstone activity. Thankfully, even Justices Sotomayor and Kagan recognized Colorado's ridiculousness.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
After taking the morning after pill, this mom immediately felt sick and nauseous as she tried to end her pregnancy. While searching for medical care, she found a preborn network clinic where she hoped to rule out that she was pregnant.
I had an ultrasound done right then and there. After hearing the baby's heartbeat, I instantly thanked God and said, "May your will be done, Lord." I'm 7 months pregnant now. I thank God every day for my little miracle.
Preborn is the largest provider of free ultrasounds in the country, introducing moms to the life growing inside of them and sharing the gospel in action. When a mother meets her baby on ultrasound and hears their heartbeat, she'll choose life 80% of the time. To learn more, dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 baby. Or visit preborn.com/AFR. That's preborn.com/AFR. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
Welcome back to Jenna Ellis in the Morning on American Family Radio.
Welcome back. Well, in another headline that's actually very important, Trump ally Viktor Orban conceded a landmark defeat in the Hungary 2026 election results for prime minister. And so the concession apparently, according at least to CNN, it will be a relief to leaders elsewhere in Europe, though it will come as a blow for U.S. President Donald Trump, who had endorsed the nationalists during the campaign. But after 16 years in power, he was defeated. So what does this actually mean in terms of the global policy of the EU, the trajectory, and also potentially for the United States? So let's welcome in Matt Tiermand, who is a political strategist and Eastern Europe expert. So Matt, what's going on? And this kind of came as a surprise, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you were on the ground in Hungary, it didn't. Politicians are like baby's diapers, and they need to be taken out, otherwise the place begins to smell like you-know-what. The people of Hungary were fatigued with Orban. It had been 4 consecutive terms, and it's a country of 9.5 million. Yes, it punched above its weight on culture war issues, especially to the global right, which is a reactionary movement against leftist globalism and radicalism and open borders insanity. That being said, Orban was no saint. The corruption was through the roof, much like the Polish right as an antecedent electoral framework a couple of years ago. And I'm very friendly with the Polish righties, but they also fatigued their own electorate with some of their behavior and hijinks. Yes, you can be against the EU's very bad leftist policy, and you can also be problematic domestically for corruption reasons, other reasons, and two things can be true at the same time. The Hungarian far right, and by the way, and this is what's so ridiculous about the coverage that's come out in the last 36 hours since the concession from Orban to Peter Magyar, the new incoming prime minister, and his new opposition party, Tisza, the left and CNN and The Atlantic and The Washington Post says, what a reprieve, democracy's back, blah, blah, blah. The right says, oh, no, Hungary's going to be overrun by Islamic hordes, much like Western Europe. They're both idiotically trying to spin this to fit their narrative. They're both incredibly wrong. Peter Magyar, the opposition leader who just won this overwhelming mandate to nix Fidesz, their four-term incumbency, he came from Fidesz. He is a conservative. He is a strong border hawk. So all this spin is absolute nonsense. Hungary will still remain a reasonable post-communist, mugged by reality bulwark against EU globalism. The borders are not going to all of a sudden open up and be overrun in a scene from the Ottoman Empire. That's not happening. But on the sort of counter-reactionary side, he's also not going to allow Hungary to be sold as a vassal state to Russia and China, which was part of why Orban lost. He was far and away the most pro-Russian prime minister and leader in Central and Eastern Europe, and that doesn't overwhelmingly play well for their electorate in post-communist, behind the Iron Curtain Central Europe. China has been investing tons of money in Hungary. The electorate has been aware of this and not happy. It has benefited Orban, his family, his friends, his cronies. It has not benefited the Hungarian people. And there's a much more mixed, nuanced view on Russia and Ukraine relationships. Hungarians are not overwhelmingly committed to a blank check to Ukraine. They have some long-term partisan feelings about Ukrainians that go back 1,000 years that are not all that positive. That being said, they also are coming out of post-communism, and they're not looking to become a Russian vassal. Orban was caught on tape saying things to Putin like, I'll be your mouse, you're a lion, come help me. I mean, he was inviting Russian intervention in Hungarian democratic politics. So honestly, I've worked with the Hungarians over the years informally. I've been to Hungary a million times and spoken. I did certainly like what Fidesz stood for, but the time was up. And Magyar, he is the ex-husband of the former justice minister in Fidesz's government. This is not some far-left radical, which, the right is trying to spin like the sky is falling, and the left is trying to spin like, thank goodness democracy is back. These people are all pushing their agenda. This Hungarian election is good for the Hungarian people. The European status quo and sort of anti-Brussels axis that exists in Central Europe is maintained. To be honest, there's a little bit of a much ado about nothing here unless you're a Hungarian.
See, and this is why I so appreciate people who have, the understanding of all of this, like you, and the expertise, Matt Tierman, because if we're just reading the headlines here in the United States, it does seem exactly like what you're saying, like, oh, this is a big blow to Trump, and democracy is back, and all of these things, rather than how you are describing this. And so you mentioned that this is voter fatigue after 16 years, and it's kind of like, okay, move on. Do you see parallels between Hungary's political trajectory and debates happening in the U.S. right now? Because I think a lot of us as well are experiencing some voter fatigue after the 10 years of, the Trump era.
No, absolutely. I mean, populist revolutions built on cult of personality don't end well. They end with a whimper, not a bang. We're certainly seeing that. The big loser on the American political scene is the J.D. Vance acolytes, the Kevin Roberts acolytes. I expect half of the Hungarian employees that were internationals, Americans and Brits who are going over there for fat sinecures funded by the taxpayer, will all end up as Heritage Fellows. J.D. Vance going over there to endorse, it's more emblematic of his fringe of righty than it is emblematic of the mainstream, whether it's sovereigntist reactionary right in Europe or Republican populist right in the U.S. There are some fringes that overlap, and J.D. Vance sort of typified this, and so it really just, to me, totally augurs that J.D. Vance doesn't really have a constituency. He's more popular with some of the Hungarians who are funded by the taxpayer against the taxpayer's will than he is with like a broad base of conservative voters, whether it's the Europeans looking toward what comes to America next, or the Americans who J.D. Vance certainly has a few in D.C., but doesn't sell well across the country.
Yeah, and that's a whole other segment. We need to have you back on just to talk about that, because I think you're absolutely right. And, some of this maybe overselling of Vance's popularity, I think we're kind of seeing some of the cracks in that visage over especially the last, month or so. And I think that that's going to be even more pronounced the further we get toward 2028. And it's been interesting to see Vance even, kind of paving the way to maybe not run. And I think that his popularity, his affiliation and loyalty to Tucker is going to be a really big problem for him. But overall, I think you're spot on that. And it's going to be very interesting to see where MAGA as a base kind of goes after Trump is no longer on the ballot, but also no longer in the White House. So, Matt Tierman, really appreciate your commentary as always, and you can follow him on X as well. And as always, you can reach me and my team, Jenna, at afr.net.